C.C. Pyle's Amazing Foot Race by Geoff Williams. Narrated by Robertson Dean. Copyright 2007-2013 by Geoff Williams. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Geoff Williams, care of De Fiore & Company Author Services, LLC, and was produced in the year 2013 by Tantor Media, Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. Prologue. The Age of Endurance. Every decade has a cultural touchstone. The 60s gave us Woodstock, the 70s, Saturday Night Fever, the 80s, larger-than-life icons like Ronald Reagan, Princess Diana, and, for a while, Michael Jackson, the 90s, the Internet, and the turn of the 21st century, the grim anniversary of September 11th. In the Roaring '20s, endurance competitions ruled. History buffs know of flappers, bootleg gin and prohibition, Chicago gangsters, Rudolph Valentino and Harry Houdini, but above all, what separates that decade from all the rest is its endurance fads. Anywhere in North America, if you had a passion or an interest, you could probably find a related endurance contest to enter. The dance marathons are the most remembered of the decade. Contestants jitterbugged or did the Charleston or some other step for days and even weeks at a time, taking a brief 5-minute break every hour to grab some food or go to the restroom. The couples even slept while dancing, alternating who would stay awake and keep their dozing partner propped up. If dancing wasn't your thing, there were swimming endurance races, or perhaps you would rather bowl? In June 1924, Hans Nelson became the world champion of endurance bowling, having won 50 games in a row against 5 veterans in 7 hours. In August 1927, Owen Evans, 19, played golf for 17 hours, with no breaks, and used a flashlight to see the ball in the dark. But endurance competitions weren't reserved only for sports. In the mid-1920s, endurance eating and drinking took the spotlight. At a New York hotel, Kathleen Hayden consumed 36 raw eggs in 85 minutes. Billy Pern of New York City drank 27 cups of coffee in a row. That was nothing compared to Gus Comstock of Fergus Falls, Minnesota, who in 1926 consumed 62 cups of coffee in 10 hours, but then was trounced by an Amarillo, Texas man who drank 71 cups in less than 9 hours. In 1927, Comstock rallied by drinking 85 cups in 7 hours and 15 minutes, only to lose his title to Frank Trachimowitz of Ray, North Dakota, who pretty much finished the conversation by consuming 90 cups of coffee in 3 hours and 28 minutes. There were contests that involved devouring sandwiches, flapjacks, hot dogs, and spaghetti. Chicago's Caterino Nazareno became pasta champion of the world after consuming 7 feet of spaghetti per minute for 3 straight hours. Adults broke records for staying awake the longest and for kissing the longest. Children were recorded flying kites for 2 days and nights and bouncing balls more than 2,000 times, all trying to achieve some legacy among world record holders. Almost as famous as the dance marathoners were the flagpole sitters. Shipwreck Kelly inspired numerous men and women to copy his successful sitting on flagpoles for days and weeks at a time. One of the most enduring images of the era is comedian Harold Lloyd dangling from a clock on a high-rise building in Safety Last, a film released April 1, 1923, that paid tribute to the endurance era. In the film, he climbed up a building to bring publicity to the store he worked for. In real life, a few weeks before Lloyd's film premiered, Harry Young was scaling the side of the Hotel Martinique when on the 10th floor he lost his grip and plunged to his death in front of 20,000 people, including his horrified wife. That was the fine print of the endurance era. The activities were risky. No one drowned on January 15, 1927, during the 22-mile swimming race from Catalina Island to the California mainland, but it didn't go well for many participants. One man tied firewood to his back, thinking it would help him float. It didn't. Another man put on layers of clothing and covered himself in swimmer's grease, all designed to keep him warm, but failed to consider how the soaked material would weigh him down. Making matters worse, he tied his shirt sleeves and pant legs securely around his wrists and ankles, but forgot about his neck, and so the ocean swept into his clothes, filling him up like a water balloon. In the hours ahead, many swimmers were dragged into boats. As one syndicated newspaper account put it, they were delirious and raving, their bodies were numb and marked with purple spots, their teeth chattered, and they limped like wet rags. The country loved it. The swimming race was all anyone talked about, especially after 17-year-old Canadian swimmer George Young reached the shoreline at 3:41 a.m., welcomed by a crowd of 5,000 spectators who wanted to get a good look at the young hero. And they got a very good look. A few seconds later, Young dashed back into the water, having just remembered that his swimming trunks had fallen off. In the aftermath of Catalina Island, and in the midst of flagpole sitting, dance marathons, and rocking chair derbies, where people spent days trying to be the last person sitting and still rocking, one man watching from the sidelines finally decided to step forward. C.C. Pyle, who made his fortune as a sports agent, had an idea. It would be the mother of all endurance contests. On April 26, 1927, at a Los Angeles press conference full of sports writers, Pyle proposed a foot race across the United States. The concept would evolve over a period of months, but his original vision remained more or less intact until March 4, 1928, when 199 men set off from Los Angeles in an attempt to race each other to New York City. Pyle's notion was that any interested man could participate, provided he paid his $125 entry fee, $100 of which would be returned at the end of the participant's involvement to allow him to have money to return home. Whoever had the fewest collective hours after passing the finish line would win $25,000. It was prize money that matched what George Young received for Catalina, but Pyle's endurance competition upped the ante. Second place would win $10,000. Third place prize money was $5,000. Fourth, $2,500. And the 5th through 10th place winners would each get $1,000. All in all, Pyle promised to award $48,500 in cash, an astounding amount of money in 1928. Using the Consumer Price Index, it would be like doling out almost $250,000 today. The thinking was that in between Los Angeles and New York, competitors would run or walk anywhere from 30 to 50 miles a day, stopping in a predetermined town, or what they called a night control, to sleep, as was the practice with the cyclists competing in the Tour de France. The next morning, the runners would set out as fast as possible for the next night control. But if the idea seems surreal now, it was positively ludicrous to 1928-era sports writers in an age of crummy roads and shoddy shoes. These men were going to run as much as 2 marathons every day for several months. Pyle, in his typically modest and understated way, told reporters that his race would be the world's greatest single athletic project. Every town through which the race is run will find great profits accruing to hotel men, the restaurateurs, and merchants in general, said Pyle in Chicago a month later. Thousands will come to town from miles around to see the contestants pass through. Pyle added that he would ask the townspeople to split their profits with him. Several months later, Pyle's enthusiasm for his project hadn't dampened at all. "From the way the entry blanks are coming in," enthused Pyle, "I'm certain we will have 1,000 starters." When a sports writer in Chicago suggested that what Pyle was planning sounded a bit like a dream, the showman replied, "Sure it does, but I'm the gent who makes dreams come true." Chapter 1. The Bunyan Derby. In the 19th century, American cities were full of con artists. Wielding a scalpel and lurking in saloons, barber shops, hotels, and deserted alleyways, they called themselves chiropodists. They gave a bad name to the reputable chiropodist, a precursor to today's podiatrist. If you were unlucky enough to meet one, you were probably already unlucky enough to have corns or bunions, and if you were naive enough to hire a chiropodist to cut off the offending part of your foot, sometimes you were unlucky enough to die from an infected wound. When C.C. Pyle conceived the course for his race in 1927, podiatry was primitive at best. It was by then a regulated medical field, but shoes were still manufactured in a way that offered little flexibility or support for the wearer, and feet were suffering for it. A Dr. Scholl's ad at the time addressed the severity of the situation, when it urged, "Don't neglect your feet. Even a corn is no trivial thing. no matter what foot trouble you suffer from, corns, calluses, bunions, tired, aching feet, weak or broken-down arches, crooked or overlapping toes, weak ankles, tender heels, perspiring or odorous feet, you can have quick and lasting relief. And now Pyle was promoting the idea of a race in which a group of people predisposed to foot problems would leave Los Angeles and run the equivalent of a couple of marathons a day, every day, until they either dropped from exhaustion or reached New York City. Even coming from a man known for being outlandish, the idea seemed too far-fetched. For the previous 2 years, one of sports writers' favorite pastimes was scorning Pyle. He had jumped onto the national scene by officially signing Red Grange as his first client on November 21, 1925. The young collegiate football player became a superstar when, in the aftermath of a phenomenal game, sports writer Grantland Rice composed football poetry describing Grange as a ghost. It was this poem that led to his nickname, the Galloping Ghost, but it was Pyle who harnessed the Galloping Ghost's energy and made him a star. Pyle had approached Grange in 1924, and after many months signed the young man as his first client. It was a bold move for Pyle, who was an obscure theater manager in Champaign, Illinois, Grange's hometown. In hindsight, it's easy to see why Grange fell under his spell. Pyle was awfully persuasive, and had been waiting for a moment like this for much of his life. At nearly 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders, Pyle dressed impeccably, usually sporting a black suit and black derby, hiding a well-groomed patch of yellowish-gray hair. The following year, the New Yorker would compare Pyle's neatly trimmed mustache to that of W.C. Fields, who used to sport a fake one in his silent films, although he dropped the look by his more famous films of the 1930s and 1940s. C.C. Pyle looked like a man of money and influence, and he was, after years of trying. His initials, sports journalists joked, stood for cash and carry, and Pyle embraced the nickname. Even a few years before meeting up with Grange, Pyle was earning a respectable living, but after representing the athlete, his income accelerated dramatically. But it wasn't Pyle's appearance that made him so convincing. The man could talk. "He is," one newspaper later wrote, "a Scotch-Irishman with twinkling gray eyes who immediately takes you in the warmth of his greeting and his general good fellowship." From a financial standpoint, the theatrical manager turned sports promoter immediately proved his word was as good as gold. 11 days into his new career, Grange was richer by $82,000, playing several games with a ragtag operation called the Chicago Bears. On his 12th day, Grange earned another $300,000 after agreeing to appear in the movie 1 Minute to Play, released in 1926. The following year, he starred in A Racing Romeo. For $12,000, Grange also agreed to have his name associated with a sweater. His approval for the creation of a Red Grange football doll rang up another $10,000. He then endorsed a brand of shoes for $5,000, a ginger ale for another $5,000, and a cap for $2,500. Pyle even convinced a cigarette firm to pay Grange in the neighborhood of $10,000 to endorse their brand. It didn't matter that Grange was known as a non-smoker. All he had to say was that if he ever were to take up smoking, he felt sure that he'd like that brand. From there, Pyle began representing tennis amateurs, turning them professional and laying the groundwork for a professional circuit. He also started to organize a hockey league in March 1927. Finally wealthy and well-known, if Pyle had an idea and a spare few minutes, he tried to implement it. But this plan for a national foot race did little more than make a lot of people shake their heads, some in admiration, others in irritation. Injury or death was a common argument against Pyle's transcontinental race. One prominent medical expert, Dr. K.H. Begg, predicted that 5 to 10 years would be shaved off the runners' lives. Clarence DeMar, famed for frequently winning the Boston Marathon, declined to participate in Pyle's epic adventure. He believed that no human being could run the equivalent of 2 Boston Marathons a day, every day, for several months. If their bodies didn't give out, their minds would, DeMar reasoned, from the monotony of running all day for months. But the thrill of endurance contests was worth the risk, even if you risked all and lost, according to William Hickman Pickens, Pyle's close friend and crucial executive for the past few years. He had said as much in his days as a promoter, in a lengthy 1909 monologue he delivered to the Los Angeles Times. "Well, the boys were a bit unlucky today," shrugged off Bill Pickens when a reporter had asked about automobile racers crashing into fences. "But what do you expect from the automobile racing game? If you cut out the danger and fence-smashing stunts, the crowds would not be attracted, and the sport would be relegated to the beanbag class. We are living in a fast age, and the professional athlete who is willing to sacrifice his bones and gore on the altar of a highly seasoned sport is the man of the hour in his line. You don't believe that Barney Oldfield thinks the crowd comes to see him break records or to witness his wonderful control over a modern juggernaut that goes crazy with the heat, do you? Not on your life. Barney often puffs one of those 6-inch perfectos and laughs, and he tells how they all come to the races when he drives for no other purpose than hoping to see him in a smash-up. They have heard so much of his different accidents and have read so often of his supposedly charmed life that they don't want to miss a chance of being in at the death." What also appeared questionable to rational people was not just what so many miles would do to the body, but that this race wouldn't be on a running track. It would be on the roads. The federal highway system was still in its infancy in 1928. Ultimately, Pyle selected Highway 66, later more famously known as Route 66. A modern marvel of interstate stretching from Los Angeles to Chicago, it was only 2 years old, largely unpaved, and it wouldn't be completely finished until 1937. The most consistently paved roads wouldn't appear until the runners were deep into Missouri, where it would remain automobile-friendly until Chicago. From there, the runners would take a hodgepodge of state routes to New York City, many of the surfaces paved, but some not. C.C. Pyle imagined runners, with only the poorest footwear, traveling over a highway of pavement as well as dirt, gravel, cement-covered bricks, and, in a few stretches, wooden planks. In 1878, a New York Times editorial made an observation that was still true in 1928. It would be impossible to form any accurate estimate of the enormous amount of human suffering that has been caused by boots and shoes. It is true that no man in his senses wears tight shoes, but even the loosest shoe, when new, is stiff and uncomfortable. To break in a new pair of shoes is something every man dreads, only slightly less than the annual visit to the dentist. Shoe companies in 1928 were making a tidy business offering the public everything they could think of to cure their aching feet. Corns, a thickening of skin that collects around the toes, scored high on the foot misery index, but the worst were bunions, a knotting of the muscle and disfigurement of the foot, typically caused by tight footwear. Shoe companies were selling everything from bunion plasters, an application pasted to the bunion, to soothing foot balm. The Coward Good Scent shoe for bunions flourished before 1900 and after. In fact, Coward Shoes as a brand thrives in the 21st century. From building the Erie Canal to inventing flight, Americans had toiled for 150 years to do everything possible to avoid walking, let alone running, across the country. No wonder sports writers scoffed when Pyle plotted his national foot race. Most people in the country didn't even personally know an avid runner. Only 168 men competed in the 1927 Boston Marathon. In comparison, 40,000 men and women showed up at the Centennial Boston Marathon in 1996. The journalist's skepticism led to a typical exchange when C.C. Pyle averred that he would have physicians examine the runners before they began the race. "First they will examine their feet," said Pyle, prompting a guffaw from someone in the crowd. "What's the idea?" demanded Pyle, who hadn't thought he had said anything funny. "Well, if a man enters a 3,000-mile foot race, the first thing to examine is his head." With such snickering, there was no chance that any self-respecting sports writer could put the wordy, pretentious name in their articles day after day. C.C. Pyle's first annual International Transcontinental Foot Race from Los Angeles to New York. To avoid Pyle's unwieldy title, a sports writer came up with a short catchphrase, which everyone else adopted. It was based on the nation's collective experience and history with foot problems. It was a nickname that stuck, that everyone eagerly embraced except C.C. Pyle. They called it the Bunyan Derby. Chapter 2. Ballyhoo. June 1927, Burlington, North Carolina. 22-year-old college student Paul Simpson was in training, running along the main road in Burlington, when he came to a pothole. He dodged it, but he should have stayed put. Simpson stepped right in front of a car. Seconds later, he was under it. It dragged him for some distance, the local paper reported, until Nellie Jarrett managed to stop her car. Not long after, Simpson's head, which usually sported a crew cut, was wrapped with strands of gauze. Easy-going and honest, he admitted to his hometown newspaper, "It was my fault." Simpson's speedy recovery more than justified his lifelong nickname. Back in high school, his friends, impressed that in 2 years on the football team he never sat on the bench, had taken to calling him Hardrock. The name stuck for good reason. A war veteran, Simpson could take a beating. When Hardrock was 15, he lied about his age and joined the Army, helping to mop up the mess in the aftermath of World War I. Anyone who knew Hardrock wasn't surprised that he entered a foot race from one end of the country to the other. The only surprise was that Hardrock was the 37th person to sign up, and not the first. He was a little late with the entry form and fee, probably because he had been immersed in his studies, a year at Elon College behind him. Worried about how he would pay his sophomore year's tuition, he figured that any of the prize money C.C. Pyle was offering could pay for his education, with money to spare, if he finished at the top of the heap. Grover L. Clark, a World War veteran and local fireman, convinced Hardrock that he needed representation if he was going to undertake Pyle's epic race. Clark went to work for his client immediately, signing him up for a local race. Hardrock could use that race to train for Pyle's grueling challenge, Clark reasoned, and if he won the local race, the $500 prize could pay the expenses he'd likely incur during a lengthy run across the country. After all, while Pyle was promising room and board, a little spare change couldn't hurt. For instance, during the course of the race, Simpson would likely have to buy shoes and socks, which were guaranteed to wear out. And that's how, on September 5, 1927, Hardrock found himself in a foot race against a Texas pony named Maud. They were to run from Burlington to Morehead City and back, a distance of 500 miles. It was a race expected to take several days, and Simpson expected to sleep that night in the town of Clayton, a distance of 75 miles away, though it's unclear if either party was required to run that far on the first leg, or if it was just every man and beast for themselves to determine when and how far they should run each day. Hardrock showed up at the fire station, where the race was to begin, at 7 a.m., an hour before the start time. Maud emerged nearby, in front of the First National Bank, at 7:45. 5 minutes before the start of the race, Simpson took his spot, and Owen Fawcett led his pony near the young man. Anxious, Simpson stripped off his sweatshirt and pants, revealing shorts and a gauze shirt that read, "Bigger, Better Burlington." There was a short speech reminding the competitors of the route for the race, and moments later, the fire chief shot a pistol into the air. Hardrock took off, and, like a transatlantic plane, had vanished in half a second, reported his hometown newspaper. Maud began with a walk, but soon she was galloping. So was Hardrock. The streets of Burlington were mobbed, and 4 miles down the road, in the tiny village of Haw River, young women threw roses at Simpson as he raced up the hill. Maud was still behind, but closing the gap, and soon after the horse overtook him, creating a substantial lead. Hardrock kept running, and after several more miles he barreled forward and passed the pony again, as a stunned Fawcett helplessly watched. By Durham, 35 miles away from Burlington, Hardrock had a lead of approximately 7 miles. By evening, 62 miles away from Burlington, in Raleigh, with the traffic heavy, Hardrock and his manager, following in a Chrysler, decided that it was time for the runner to call it a day. Having been hit by a car recently, Hardrock was in no mood to repeat the experience. Besides, Maud was nowhere in sight. But the next day, as Hardrock ran through Clayton at around 8:45 in the morning, he and Maud were pretty much neck and neck. "Rock feeling fine," wired Clark. Unfortunately, so was Maud. Later that afternoon, in the town of Princeton, Fawcett likely felt relieved that Maud was ahead of Hardrock, but only ahead by 2 miles, and for all of those miles hundreds of cars were lined up against the road, cheering both man and beast on. Not everyone was enthusiastic. On one street in Raleigh, 3 thugs began running alongside Hardrock, and one of them grabbed at his shirt. "I'm not a fighting man," snapped Hardrock, and then he sprinted forward, leaving the men behind. Then, just 5 miles away, in Garner, a mob of people stormed through the village, chasing Hardrock. The suspicious villagers had heard of a sweaty man in shorts and short sleeves running toward their town, alongside a man on a horse, and they had decided that Hardrock must be insane, perhaps an escapee from the Dix Hill Asylum in Raleigh. Hardrock's manager wasn't around, but a traveling salesman stopped the crowd from turning ugly. He informed them of the race, and Hardrock was able to slip through Garner unharmed. Other cities throughout the day provided police escorts, allowing Hardrock to race through red lights. In one town, Hardrock sprinted into a drugstore and, while jogging in place, consumed a glass of milk. "Got no money," Hardrock huffed. "Stop my official car, and Clark will pay you." The drugstore owner, apparently quite impressed, told Clark that the milk was on the house. Then, on the 3rd day, it came to an abrupt end. Hardrock had limped into Kinston, North Carolina, the evening before, having run a total of 145 miles, and after looking at his foot, Clark suggested that he see a doctor. The next morning, a physician examined Hardrock and insisted that he either quit the race or risk blood poisoning. It was his toe, mostly, that was in such poor shape. An argument ensued, but Hardrock finally came to his senses. Maud was just 5 miles up the road, and in no shape to go anywhere either. A truck was sent to pick up Maud and bring her back to Burlington. Fawcett figured it was just as well. He conceded that while Maud had run 5 more miles than Hardrock, she wouldn't have been able to resume a run either. Additionally, Fawcett didn't feel too well. "Simpson and the pony are tired, all right," he agreed. "But what about me? I was glad to get out of it. That saddle became a very uncomfortable seat." Hardrock returned to his hometown a hero. He didn't get his $500, and the people who gambled on him lost, but Hardrock would forever be a local legend anyway. In his hometown of Burlington, the story gradually changed over the days and decades, the tale told with a slightly more dramatic ending. Hardrock stopped running after learning that the horse, which was many miles behind him, had dropped dead from exhaustion. Close enough. And there was no doubt among the townspeople that summer of 1927. Everyone in his hometown and the surrounding areas agreed. This guy was going to win Pyle's race. 1927, Granite City, Illinois. Frank Johnson, a 38-year-old steel worker from Granite City, Illinois, a suburb of St. Louis, was every bit the typical middle-class American. He and his wife Clara, along with their 2 children, lived in an unremarkable house and had unremarkable lives. In fact, that normalcy may have been what attracted Johnson to the outrageous idea of running across the country. Pyle's prize money was also a powerful draw. Johnson was providing for his wife of 17 years, as well as their kids, Alice, 14, and Frank Jr., 9. Clara's father, Henry Grothjohn, 60, a night watchman at the steel mill, lived with them as well, and Pyle's promised thousands teased the family's imagination. Johnson worked at Commonwealth Steel Company, one of the largest employers in his community, an operation that had existed since the Civil War. They specialized in building locomotive engines, although he primarily worked on automobiles. Johnson ran marathons in his younger days, and so he felt like he had as realistic a shot of winning the prize money as anyone. He couldn't afford to leave his job for the 3 months that runners were expected to be on the road, however, obliging him and Clara to raise cash from friends, family, and anyone who had a spare dollar to replace the income they'd lose while he was away. But it was a risk worth taking, Frank Johnson reasoned, if they ever wanted their lives to be anything more than unremarkable. Clara didn't see it that way. She thought the endurance fads were an affront to civilization. 1927, Columbia, South Carolina. In his second year of college, Morris Saperstein, 21, was planning a career in law, studying at the University of South Carolina.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?